Let's talk about the relationship that's at the core of this book.
The Orpheus and Eurydice relationship, I mean. Although it's actually, like all great love stories, they're always triangles. In the original myth, remember, Orpheus is such a gifted musician that wild beasts fall tame when he plays. He's madly in love with Eurydice, who's chased by a jealous rival, a shepherd Aristeus, and in fleeing his crude advances, she falls and is bitten by a snake and dies. And that sets in motion Orpheus' journey into the underworld to rescue her, to bring her back. So there's a triangle in my book, too. The Orpheus character is the musician, Mishka. The Eurydice character is Leela, who's from the Deep South, which I now have close acquaintanceship with, and Cobb Slaughter, in military intelligence, who was a very close childhood friend of Leela's, has always carried a torch for her, and whose motives are rather mixed, because personal jealousy is mixed up with his patriotic zeal.
She's very spontaneous, and that's probably understating it hugely.
All my novels have rather feisty female characters, and right from the moment that I knew I was going to do a contemporary take on the Orpheus and Eurydice myth, I knew I was going to give it a feminist inversion, because it's just always irritated the heck out of me from childhood onwards that the only role for women in fairy tales and myths was to sit around waiting to be rescued, to be locked in a tower and wait to be rescued, or to sit in the palace and wait for 3 nights to fight for your hand in marriage with feats of daring do. So I knew that Eurydice was going to be the active one who rescued Orpheus. But like Leela, I grew up in a fundamentalist household. It was not very hard to transpose Queensland, Australia to South Carolina. In fact, since both states are thought of within their countries as the hick state, the backwoods state, they have a long and ugly history of race relations. This is no longer true of Queensland for the last 3 premiers since the Labor government got in, but it used to be the feudal state with the most corrupt politics, and South Carolina still is, both a Bible Belt. So it wasn't too difficult to transpose a fundamentalist childhood in Queensland, Australia, to South Carolina, where it's all around me and where it's intensified. I've taken to saying in South Carolina, that I grew up in this state, except it was in Australia.
She never gives up trying to get her boyfriend back. I mean, they run into the wrong person with her.
Yes, well, yeah. In the original myth, it was Orpheus that was absolutely determined and got past Cerberus and got to the heart of hell and then made this fateful mistake at the end and lost Eurydice forever. My Eurydice figure is just as determined as the mythic Orpheus was. One episode in that actually happened while I was in Australia 3 years ago, in the early stages of writing the book, because Australian troops, I'm sorry to say, are also in Iraq and Afghanistan and have been from the beginning. The wrong body was a dead body, was sent back to a family, and it was the wrong body, and they haven't been able to find the body of their son, which was so shocking. But that gave me the episode where they think Mishka's being sent back to Australia, but it isn't Mishka. And that's part of what happens with ghosting, is because there are no records kept if people are let go. And I've read extensive accounts of this. I mean, people can be taken in. Ara is an example. People can be taken in and tortured, and then finally, if they're very lucky, it's realized that they actually have nothing to do with anything, and they're let go, by which time they may be so damaged, both physically and mentally and emotionally, that they can't find their way back to where they are, and there are no records of them for other people to trace, nor if they are sufficiently intact emotionally and intellectually, do they have any grounds for taking action, because there's never any record that they were prisoners or were tortured. There's a lot of that happening.
It's very creepy.
Well, that's always has been one of my themes, is how people negotiate the rest of their lives in the wake of trauma, of really terrible losses, or terrible trauma to themselves. It's always one of the things that interests me, because there are three ways people go. Some people just are simply not able to put their lives together in any functioning way after that, and their suicides fairly early on. Others go on living, but the most common route is to go on living, but in varying degrees of dysfunctional ways. But you know, they go on, but they're dysfunctional in one way or another. But a very small proportion emerge resilient and strong and triumphant, and I'm sort of always curious, always exploring, you know, what makes the difference, what makes it possible for some people to emerge in that way. But mostly, of course, most of my characters tend to be in that middle range. They survive. Like Cobb's father, like Cobb himself, who had a violent father and found his mother hanged as a child. You know, these are all damaged people, but they do survive in varying degrees of dysfunctionality. But they all, love saves all of them, ultimately, Lila, Cobb, and Mishka.
The book is Orpheus Lost. I've been speaking with the author, Janette Turner Hospital, and Orpheus Lost is published by Knopf Canada.